I was walking through forest. I was slightly sick. I had come from a ritual that I had been of service to. I had been in community, though uncomfortable. I thought about so many of the things that we try to express and do and say. And while walking in a redwood forest I didn't know existed right outside of Oakland, this idea formulated that I thought I would just try to record. And I've had this idea of layering talking over photo slideshow things for a while. So this is just an experiment, and you may find it interesting. Intro over. Here is the actual recording of me trying to explain concepts. Enjoy. All religions are talking about a specific dimension of reality. And that is to say, a dimension of spirituality. And there are many dimensions of spirituality that nest and interlace and interfold and surround what we call reality, which are empirical realms manifest in the physical, I believe is what I would think of as reality. Spirituality are also planes of existence that are actual, if not real, and many of them are described in reality through religious texts, which are metaphors to talk about things that are in a completely different dimension. So whenever we speak of spiritual matters using metaphors, we're always kind of missing the point. We're always talking around something. We're always giving a suggestion for you to feel. Because spiritualities, is always right next to you like reality is. You can be sitting next to a path looking out at a view over the forest and the hills, clouds, patches of sun. And you can see it, but you're not necessarily experiencing it. You could smell it. You could walk through it. You could touch it. You could examine it through a microscope. Watch it change. These are ways of experiencing reality. And at least in the way I believe, you could also experience the view through opening yourself up to identifying with the view and all of the details, rocks, trees, clouds, sun. Understand that they are you, you are them, and experience what that feels like. But our vessels, our vehicles are not exactly equipped to do that. That is to say, your body doesn't have sensory organs to experience a large view as a personal reality. But your subtle body is able to do that, basically, if you know how to manipulate it like that. And what do I mean by that? Well, you might know how to do yoga or gymnastics if your body is trained to know how to do that. So your subtle body is the body that you use while you're dreaming and doing energy healing work. And so you can, if your subtle body is trained in such ways to expand beyond the limits and perceptions of your earthly vehicle or your gross, fleshy, physical body, then you could perhaps experience being a tree while still experience being a body. You may, if you're skilled enough, perhaps feel sensations that the tree is feeling, or you may just feel energy movements of the tree. Some people are very adept at this. It's in fact normal, commonplace. So they don't even think about it or describe it much. They don't know how to tell you how to do it because they just do it like you breathe or see or hear. And such is reality and spirituality. That again, there's a certain necessity of training, of gymnastics, of sauna practice, of gym practice that you can do with your spiritual body or your subtle body, as I described it earlier, or as I labeled it earlier. All of these things are metaphors suggesting, surrounding the actuality of what it is, which is something that cannot be said, but can be experienced, which is really what the realm of spirituality, what I'm getting at, is about, that you can slide in to spiritual experiences and have a very actual, I was going to say real, but I don't want to mix up those terms. You can have a very, you can have an experience, a spiritual experience that is not just some delusion or dream, or, empirical materialists may say, yes, well, it's just a dream, it's just a daydream, it's just a fantasy. That's fine. But for those who are adept, they can just experience it. And when you talk about fairies, realms of fairies, Jesus Christ, Kali, Krishna, Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, when you talk about anatta, you can experience these things directly. You can have direct experience of them. Perhaps not through your eyes, ears, nose, mouth, taste, fingers. Perhaps not even through your brain. And that's where a lot of imperial materialists get confused, because they think that the entire experience of the self is centered in the brain. Apart from other scientific studies that show that there's just as many neurons, ganglia, and clusters in the abdomen and around the heart. Other minds, other brains inside the body. But there's this whole other way you can experience things, and spirituality is very difficult, because when you come back to this realm, that is to say communicating in the real world through the fleshy body, you can only talk about those experiences in metaphors, allegories, parables. And again, these are ill-fitting suits, ill-fitting maps. Map is more unreal than where you've been and how you feel. Quoting someone, Feist, that when you're trying to share that, or when you're trying to receive that, reading from a book on Gnosticism or religions or magic systems or chakra systems or any kind of spiritual experience, that there's this suggestion that you have to do a certain amount of work in order to be able to receive. Like one has to train oneself in literacy in order to be able to read a book. One has to train oneself in spiritual subtleness, agileness, in order to read the meaning, experience the meaning. And this is where a lot of people get confused. The definitions of reality, the definitions of spirituality. This is something that came to me recently, because I try to talk about these things, and of course the more you try to do something, the better at it you get, the more you stay on course, on point. Persistence and patience and presence and perception.
I was kind of like, I went for a ride with you guys one day and saw things literally from your
Hi, guys.
perspective. And they were like, we love that. I would love to do
And so through these efforts, it came to, click into my consciousness that clearly that spirituality is another realm of existence, like reality. What are the other ities? Reality, spirituality. I think I tried to think about this earlier before and I couldn't come up with one. Functionality. That's kind of a word. Sexuality. Yes, sexuality. That is a whole realm of experience that one can talk about, one can read about, one can watch videos of, and it's very different than the experience of it. And the entire experience of sexuality is not necessarily experienced in the physical realm, in the reality, in the spirituality. But perhaps what attracts me so much to sexuality is I feel like it is somewhat of a bridge between spirituality and reality, emotionality. These are all overlapping, nesting dimensions, perhaps of what we call reality. Maybe I'm saying reality is just physicality, and a lot of people believe reality is just physicality, so that could be a misperception, miscommunication. So indeed, physicality interacts with sexuality, and sexuality interacts with physicality and spirituality and emotionality and what others? Many. And so some of these dimensions connect and loop in, and some of these connections don't. Some of these dimensions don't connect. And of course, they probably do. Probably all of them do somehow. Or if they don't, we can build a dimensional layer to loop it in, nest it in. And indeed, there are always frontiers. It's always possible to be a pioneer. Somebody who sews together planes, if the planes are two-dimensional, if the dimensions are two-dimensional. I don't know if that's a good way of expressing that, but for those of you who've done geometry, you might know what I'm talking about. Wow. I feel like I've adequately expressed this right now, and we'll address it later. So if you listened to this and or watched this, do me a favor and give me some feedback on if I should just release recordings as podcasts without images, or you find the images useful in any way, or you find the content of this something to have a conversation about that is also interesting and useful. I guess any kind of feedback, because again, part of my intention is to make some slideshows similar to this, a way of throwing all the images together instead of editing good ones and bad ones and just talking over them. So my full idea would be to tell stories about, I took these images while I was doing this. Like these images you're looking at right now were outside of a hot spring that I spent the night at not too far off the I-5, somewhere between the Bay Area and LA, which I did not go to LA. I went to Mercy Hot Springs, and there were some owls sitting in the tree watching over us, calling to me while I was sleeping. I walked in the morning after soaking in hot springs, and then I left. Oh, and this is the end of the recording, so hope you enjoyed. Give me some feedback if you listened and saw this. Mwah.